The winter of 1547 brought more than just bitter cold to the halls of Whitehall Palace. Behind the ornate doors of England's most magnificent royal residence, a smell lingered that no amount of perfume or burning herbs could mask. It was the stench of death, creeping slowly through the corridors like a plague, emanating from the chambers of the man who had once been Europe's most feared monarch. King Henry VIII, the titan who had reshaped England's destiny through sheer force of will, was dying. But this was no noble death befitting a warrior king. This was something far more grotesque, far more horrifying than the romantic tales of history would have you believe. The man who had executed 2 wives and countless nobles, who had torn England from Rome and forged a new church in his own image, now lay trapped within a body that had become his prison. What unfolded during those final winter months wasn't just the death of a king. It was the systematic destruction of a human being, piece by agonizing piece. The popular imagination has sanitized Henry's end into something almost dignified, a quick fade to black for a complex monarch. But the reality was infinitely more brutal, more psychologically devastating than any execution he had ever ordered. Today, we're stripping away centuries of myth to examine the unflinching truth of Henry VIII's final days. What you are about to discover will fundamentally change how you see one of history's most notorious rulers, because sometimes the most powerful lesson about absolute power comes not from how it's wielded, but from how helplessly it crumbles when faced with mortality itself. By January 1547, the Golden Prince, who had once dazzled European courts with his athletic prowess and scholarly wit, had become something unrecognizable. Picture this if you can: a man so grotesquely swollen that he required mechanical devices just to move from room to room. His legs, once powerful enough to dominate jousting tournaments, were now riddled with open wounds that oozed a putrid mixture of blood and pus. The smell was so overwhelming that courtiers would press perfumed handkerchiefs to their faces when entering his presence, struggling not to retch from the stench of rotting flesh. But the physical horror was only the beginning. What made Henry's decline truly terrifying was watching one of history's most dominant personalities slowly disintegrate from within. The king who had commanded absolute obedience from millions now found himself powerless against the rebellion of his own body. His legendary temper, once feared throughout Christendom, had warped into something far more disturbing. Explosive rages that would erupt without warning, followed by periods of confused lethargy where he seemed to forget where he was or who was speaking to him. Modern medical analysis suggests Henry was battling a devastating combination of ailments. Type 2 diabetes was slowly poisoning his blood, while chronic osteomyelitis, a bone infection, was literally eating him alive from the inside out. His weight had ballooned to an estimated 400 pounds, his body a battlefield of competing diseases that his physicians were utterly helpless to treat. The royal doctors tried everything their medieval knowledge could offer. They bled him regularly, believing it would balance his humors. They applied bizarre concoctions to his festering wounds, everything from boiled onions to powdered human skull mixed with exotic herbs. When desperate times called for desperate measures, they even resorted to placing live pigeons cut in half against his infected legs, hoping the warmth might draw out the poison. Each treatment only added to his agony, yet the king's condition continued its relentless decline. What makes this story even more chilling is how the machinery of royal power continued grinding forward, even as its central figure decomposed before everyone's eyes. Court life maintained its elaborate rituals and ceremonies, while just down the corridor, their sovereign writhed in agony that would have broken lesser men. The contrast was stark and unsettling. Gilded halls filled with music and laughter, while Henry's screams echoed through the stone walls of his private chambers. The psychological torment may have been worse than the physical pain. Here was a man who had literally rewritten the laws of God and country to suit his desires, who had made kings and emperors tremble at his displeasure. Yet now he found himself completely helpless, unable to command his own flesh to obey. The ultimate humiliation for history's greatest control freak was discovering that absolute power meant nothing when your own body declared war against you. The nights were the worst. Palace servants would later describe hearing sounds that no human throat should make, guttural moans that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than pain itself. Henry's personal attendants worked in shifts, partly because the physical demands of moving his massive frame required multiple men, but mostly because witnessing his deterioration for extended periods proved too psychologically damaging for any single person to endure. The king's mental state fluctuated wildly between moments of terrifying clarity and episodes of complete dissociation from reality. During lucid periods, he would obsessively review his will, desperately trying to control the future of his dynasty, even as his present slipped away. But these rational moments were increasingly interrupted by delirious episodes where he would ramble incoherently about the ghosts of his victims. Court records describe him calling out to Anne Boleyn in the middle of the night, sometimes pleading with her forgiveness, other times raging at her betrayal as if she stood beside his bed. Perhaps most disturbing was watching Henry grapple with spiritual terror. The man who had proclaimed himself head of the Church of England, who had dismissed papal authority with the stroke of a pen, now seemed haunted by questions about divine judgment. His personal chaplain recorded how the king would swing between demanding Catholic last rites one day and reaffirming Protestant doctrine the next, as if he could somehow hedge his bets with eternity itself. The political implications of the king's condition created a dangerous undercurrent throughout the palace. Powerful factions were already positioning themselves for the inevitable power struggle that would follow Henry's death. The conservative Catholic nobles, led by the Duke of Norfolk, found themselves increasingly outmaneuvered by the Protestant reformers surrounding young Prince Edward. Every day Henry clung to life was another day for these competing groups to strengthen their positions and eliminate potential rivals. What made the situation even more precarious was the absolute secrecy surrounding the king's true condition. Royal proclamations continued to describe Henry as being in good health, while anyone permitted into his chambers was sworn to silence under penalty of death. This elaborate deception served multiple purposes, preventing foreign powers from sensing weakness, avoiding panic among the populace, and most importantly, preventing premature power grabs by ambitious nobles who might view a dying king as an opportunity. Looking at Henry's ghastly final hours, we confront an uncomfortable truth about power and mortality that echoes through the centuries. The man who had terrorized Europe with his absolute authority ultimately faced the same fate as his humblest subjects: a body in revolt, dignity stripped away, and death approaching with merciless inevitability. His horrifying end serves as history's most visceral reminder that no crown, no matter how heavy, can shield us from our fundamental human vulnerability.